The marble floor of the lake house was cold against my cheek, and I remember thinking, distantly, that the blood from my nose had finally stopped dripping onto my mother-in-law's antique rug. 6 seconds earlier, my husband's hand had connected with my face hard enough to spin me half around, and the woman behind him, his assistant, his just a colleague, the one whose lipstick I'd found on his collar 3 separate times, was sobbing into his shoulder like she was the one who'd been hit. "You did this," he said. He wasn't even looking at me. He was looking at her, smoothing her hair, his voice gone soft the way it never went soft for me anymore. "You shoved her into the railing. She could have gone down the stairs, Brielle. She could have died." I hadn't touched her. I hadn't been within 4 feet of her. But Camille had a gift for falling exactly when it would ruin me, and my husband had a gift for believing whatever made him feel like the hero. His name was Theo Whitfield, and for 9 years I had been Mrs. Whitfield, and for the last 18 months I had also been, quietly and without his knowledge, the only person on earth who knew his real financial situation, because I was the one who'd been propping it up. I want to tell you how I ended up on that floor, because by the time I'm done you'll understand why I wasn't crying. Not because I was strong, because I already knew something he didn't. I met Theo when I was 26, waiting tables at a place on Bloor Street in Toronto that did overpriced charcuterie boards for finance bros who tipped badly and talked loudly. He was 31, already running his father's commercial estate firm into the ground in slow motion, though I didn't know that yet. What I knew was that he laughed at things I said like they were the funniest things he'd ever heard, that he showed up 3 nights in a row just to sit at my section, and that when he finally asked for my number he did it so nervously, he knocked over his water glass. I fell for that version of him, hard and fast and completely. We got married 18 months later at a small chapel near Niagara-on-the-Lake. His mother sniffing through the whole ceremony because I wasn't from their world. Whatever that meant, I didn't care. I thought love was supposed to be enough to bridge a gap like that. What nobody tells you is that some gaps don't close. They just get papered over until the wallpaper starts to peel. The first 5 years were good, or good enough that I convinced myself the bad parts were normal marriage friction. Theo's business struggled after his father died. Turns out his father had been the only one keeping Whitfield Realty Group out of the red, and Theo had inherited the title without inheriting the instinct. I watched him lose 2 major developments in a row. I watched him refinance, then refinance again. And when the second refinance wasn't enough, I did something I never told him the truth about. My grandmother, my mother's mother, a woman who'd left Hungary in 1956 with nothing, and built a textile import business in Montreal that nobody in Theo's circle had ever heard of because she never wanted them to, had left everything to me when she died. Not to my mother, who'd spent her whole life trying to get an advance on it. To me specifically, with a letter that said she trusted me not to let anyone talk me out of using it wisely. It wasn't New York high-risk money. It was Canadian business-built over 60 years money, quieter and slower and frankly, more real. $11 million, sitting in a trust I'd kept separate, in an account Theo didn't know existed, managed by a lawyer in Montreal who'd known my grandmother for 40 years, and who I trusted more than I trusted my own husband, which should have told me something even then. When Theo's company started circling the drain, I didn't tell him I had money. I told him I'd take out a line of credit against some savings and quietly funneled $400,000 into some company through a numbered holding company my lawyer set up, structured as a loan from an outside investor. Theo never asked who the investor was. He was too relieved to ask. Men like Theo rarely interrogate good news. That was 3 years ago. Since then, I'd quietly become Whitfield Realty Group's single largest creditor, holding paper on nearly 40% of the company's outstanding debt, all of it routed through a shell with a name that meant nothing to him, Larkspur Holdings. He thought Larkspur was some Bay Street private equity outfit being unusually patient with him. He had no idea Larkspur's sole signing authority was his wife. I kept it secret for 2 reasons. The first was practical. Theo's pride was the kind that curdled into resentment the second he felt indebted to anyone, and I'd watched what that resentment did to his relationship with his own mother, who'd bailed him out once before. The second reason I didn't admit to myself until much later. Some part of me already suspected I might need the leverage. I was right. Camille Bouchard started as a marketing consultant Theo brought on 18 months ago. I noticed the shift before I had proof. He started showering before bed instead of in the morning, started keeping his phone face down, started working late on a Tuesday, and then again on a Thursday in a pattern so textbook, I almost laughed when I finally pieced it together. I found a hotel charge from the Fairmont in March. I found a text in November that I wasn't meant to see, where he called her the only person who actually understands what I'm trying to build. I didn't confront him right away. I'm not proud of that, but I also won't pretend it was weakness. I needed to understand exactly what I was dealing with before I moved, because the one lesson my grandmother's whole life taught me was that you never show your hand to someone who's already decided you're disposable. So I watched. I watched him grow colder toward me at home, and warmer toward her at the office. I watched him stop introducing me as my wife at company events and start introducing me, when he had to introduce me at all, as Brielle. She handles a lot of the personal side of things. Like I was an assistant, not the woman who'd kept his company solvent through a recession. I watched Camille's confidence grow in direct proportion to my husband's coldness, until she stopped pretending to be subtle at all. The lake house weekend was supposed to be a family thing. Theo's mother's 65th birthday. Out at the place near Muskoka his family had owned for 3 generations. I almost didn't go. Some instinct told me not to, but I went because some other instinct, the stubborn one, told me I wasn't going to let Camille watch me shrink out of my own marriage. She'd been invited. Theo's mother, Eleanor, who had never liked me but liked chaos even less, hadn't wanted her there, but Theo had insisted, calling Camille essential to the Q3 presentation, which was insulting on 2 levels because it wasn't even close to true and because nobody believed it for a second. The fall happened on the second night. Camille had been drinking, performing a kind of theatrical wobbliness all evening that I should have recognized as setup. She came down the back staircase as I was coming up, and in the half-second before she lost her footing, I saw her eyes flick toward Theo, who was standing in the hallway below with his phone out, recording. I realized later, though he claimed afterward he'd just happened to be filming the room for memories. She went down hard dramatically, grabbing the railing and crying out my name as she fell. Not help or oh God, but my name Brielle, like an accusation already rehearsed. By the time Theo reached her, she was sobbing about how I'd pushed her, and the footage, conveniently angled, showed exactly enough ambiguous motion to support whatever story she wanted to tell. That's when he hit me. In front of his mother, in front of 2 cousins, in front of the housekeeper who'd worked for the Whitfields for 20 years, and who I watched flinch and look away rather than say anything. I didn't cry on that floor. I want you to understand that clearly, because I think it confused him more than tears would have. I just looked up at him and said very quietly, okay. He thought I meant okay, I accept this. What I meant was okay. I understand now exactly what I am to you, and I'm done pretending otherwise. I left the next morning before anyone was awake. I didn't take much. I'd learned years ago not to keep anything in that house I couldn't walk away from in under 10 minutes. I drove the 2.5 hours back to Toronto with my split lip throbbing and my hands steady on the wheel, and I called my lawyer in Montreal before I'd even merged onto the highway. I think it's time, I told him. You're sure, he said. It wasn't really a question. He'd been waiting almost as long as I had. I want to walk you through the next 10 days, because this is the part where everything Theo built without me started coming apart. And I think it's worth understanding exactly how. Because it wasn't dramatic in the way you'd expect. There was no single moment of confrontation, no scene where I marched into his office and revealed myself like a villain in a film. It was quieter than that, and slower, and that made it worse for him. The first thing that happened was that Larkspur Holdings declined to renew the bridge financing on the Danforth Avenue mixed-use project. $11 million Theo's company had been counting on closing within the month, financing he'd already verbally promised to 2 contractors and 1 increasingly impatient city councilor, whose support he needed for a zoning variance. The decline came through routine legal channels, polite and impersonal, citing a reassessment of portfolio risk exposure. Theo's CFO called him about it on a Tuesday afternoon. I know because Theo called me that night, the first time he'd called me, not texted, called, in over 4 months. Some private equity firm just pulled out of the Danforth deal, he said, and I could hear something underneath his voice that I hadn't heard in years. Fear, I don't understand it. We had a verbal commitment. That's strange, I said, and I meant it to sound exactly as flat as it did. Are you coming home? My mother thinks you overreacted about Saturday. I didn't answer that. I let the silence sit there until he filled it with something else. Something about how Camille had misread the situation, and how he'd obviously overreacted himself, and how we should talk things through like adults, which was rich, coming from the man whose hand was still half bruised across my cheekbone. The second thing that happened was that I stopped paying the personal credit line I'd been quietly servicing for 2 years, $120,000 a year that covered the mortgage on the house. His mother had insisted they buy in Rosedale, the one Theo's actual income hadn't supported in 3 years without my help. Help he'd never known the source of because I'd always framed it as my consulting income. A lie that had been easy to maintain because Theo had simply never asked enough questions to require a harder one. The mortgage payment bounced on the 15th. The third thing, and this is the one that actually broke things open, was that I met with my lawyer and we formally called the Larkspur debt. Not all of it. Just enough. 40% of a company's debt suddenly coming due with a 90-day clause is the kind of thing that turns a wobbling business into a collapsing one, especially when the company's own bank gets wind of it and starts asking uncomfortable questions about liquidity. By day 8, Theo's CFO had resigned. I heard this from my lawyer, who heard it from a contact at the bank, who mentioned it almost in passing. The way these things travel in a city as small as Toronto's business community actually is, once you're inside it. By day 9, Camille had stopped coming into the office. I don't know the exact reason, though I have a guess. When the money disappears, people like Camille tend to disappear faster than the money did. She'd attached herself to Theo because of what he represented, not who he was, and what he represented was evaporating in real time. On day 10, Theo showed up at the condo I'd been staying in, a place downtown my best friend Pauline owned, and had handed me the keys to without a single question. Just a hug and a stay as long as you need. He looked like he hadn't slept. His usually careful hair was a mess. There was a gray pallor to his face I'd never seen on him, not even during his father's funeral. Whitfield Realty is going to lose the Danforth project, he said, before I'd even gotten the door fully open. We're going to lose the Eaton Center lease renewal too if I can't show liquidity by Friday. Brielle, I don't understand what's happening. Everything that could go wrong is going wrong at once. That sounds awful, I said, and stepped back to let him in, because some part of me did want him to see my face when I finally said what I was about to say. I need $800,000 by Friday or the bank pulls our operating line entirely, he said. I know things have been bad between us. I know I know what I did was unforgivable. I do, but Brielle, this is the company. This is everything my father built. I'm asking you, as my wife, please, do you have anything? Your family, anyone, and there it was. 9 years of marriage, and the first time he'd ever genuinely, openly asked me for help, it was because he needed something from me, not because he'd ever once wondered what I might need. I sat down across from him at Pauline's kitchen table, and I told him about my grandmother, about the textile business in Montreal, about the trust, about the $11 million he'd never once asked about, because he'd never once been curious about where my savings came from. Because curiosity about me had stopped being a habit of his sometime around year 4. Then I told him about Larkspur. I watched his face change in real time, the way you'd watch a building actually collapse if you could slow it down frame by frame. Confusion first, then disbelief, then something that looked almost like relief, because for 1 second he thought I was telling him this to offer to fix it. You're Larkspur, he said. You're the one who called the debt. I am. Why would you do that to me? I'm your husband. I almost laughed. Almost. You hit me in front of your mother because a woman you were sleeping with staged a fall, and you chose to believe her over me without even glancing at the security footage you yourself were holding. You've spent 18 months making me feel like a guest in my own marriage, and you're asking me why I wouldn't hand you another $800,000. That's not. I never meant for you to find out like that. The thing with Camille was, it wasn't what you think. It was a mistake. It was 9 months, Theo. The Fairmont charge was in March. It's November. He didn't have an answer for that. There isn't one. I told him I wasn't going to call the rest of the debt immediately. That wasn't the kind of person I wanted to become. And besides, vindictiveness wasn't actually the point. The point was that I was done being invisible inside my own life. I told him Larkspur would restructure the existing debt on standard commercial terms, the same terms any arm's-length lender would offer. No favors, no family discount. I told him our marriage was over, and that I'd already filed, and that under Ontario family law, given the nature of how I'd funded both his company and his household for the better part of 3 years, my lawyer was confident the division of assets would reflect that, including, very likely, my interest in Whitfield Realty Group itself, the company his great-grandfather had founded, partly because his own wife had quietly kept it alive. He didn't say anything for a long time. Then he asked the only question that actually mattered to him in that moment. Does my mother know? Not yet, I said, but she will, when the paperwork is public. So will the city councillor whose endorsement you're counting on for the Danforth variance. When he finds out Larkspur holds enough of your debt to make the whole project conditional on terms I control. He left without saying anything else. I didn't watch him go down the elevator. I made tea instead, the same loose-leaf Earl Grey my grandmother used to make, and I sat by Pauline's window looking out at the lake. and for the first time in longer than I could remember, my chest didn't feel tight. It's been 4 months now. Whitfield Realty Group still exists, technically, though under restructured terms and a new CFO who reports, in part to me. Since Larkspur's restructuring agreement included board observer rights I exercised without a flicker of guilt. Theo's mother called me twice. The first time to yell, the second time 3 weeks later to say very stiffly that she perhaps hadn't fully understood the situation, which from Eleanor Whitfield was as close to an apology as I expect I'll ever get. Camille, as far as I know, left the company entirely in Toronto along with it. I heard she's in Calgary now. I don't think about her much. She was never really the point. I bought a small place in the beaches, close enough to the water that I can hear it some mornings if I leave the window cracked. My grandmother's lawyer in Montreal still manages the trust, though there's less mystery to it now. I don't have to hide where my money comes from anymore. Don't have to frame strength as a secret I'm keeping for someone else's comfort. People ask me sometimes if I regret staying quiet for so long, letting Theo believe I was smaller than I was. I don't. Not really. I think there's a particular kind of clarity you only get from watching someone reveal exactly who they are while they think you're not paying close enough attention to notice. He showed me precisely what he thought I was worth on that staircase. I just made sure, eventually, that he understood what I actually was.